Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Uniform with the LT's daughter. I am here with an LT, a retired LT, Randy Sutton. He's also the founder of the Wounded Blue, and I am so honored to be chatting with you today. Thank you so much for being here, Randy.
It is a pleasure. Good to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to dive in. So let's just start off with why you decided to get into law enforcement.
Well, I consider myself very fortunate because from a very young age, I knew exactly what I was going to do with my life. And it has to do with family, of course. My grandfather was a deputy sheriff who had been shot in the line of duty and by a poacher of all things. And my parents, he survived that, but he had a great scar that he showed me every time that we got together. And my parents were both court reporters, so I grew up listening to stories about law enforcement and about murder trials and all of this, but more probably instinctually, I was a protector even as a child. I always had an affinity for the those who were victimized, by the schoolyard bully.
Hmm.
If you remember those days, right?
Yeah. Oh,
There
yeah.
were there were always those who would bully others, and it offended me greatly. And so I would interfere on behalf of people who were being bullied, and that continued because in essence, criminals are bullies. That's they prey on people who are less fortunate or weaker than they are. And so that was, I think maybe some people are born to protect. Some of us, we call ourselves sheepdogs, and we protect the flock. And I think there's something instinctual in that. So I always knew what I was going to be. And through a series of unintended events, I became a police officer at 19, which was actually, I was the youngest cop in the state of New Jersey at the time. So I was born and raised in a little town, Princeton, New Jersey, where the university is. And I
Right by
literally,
me.
where are you?
I'm just outside of Philadelphia.
Okay, yeah, yeah, very, very, very
Yeah.
close. So, it was an idyllic life. I was literally, I had a beaver cleaver life.
Yes.
I had great parents that were very nurturing and good human beings. Raised me uh, to to be uh, to be protective of others and to care about other people. So I was very fortunate in that regard. Now, the way I became a cop is kind of interesting. It all came about because I was getting thrown out of high school, and so Princeton was a very liberal town even then. And in high school, I told you I was a protector of others. So when I had gotten into several fights during my high school career, and never did I start them, but I was always protecting somebody else, right? And I was getting thrown out of school again for another fight, and I'm in the principal's office waiting for my mother to pick me up again. And the principal actually liked me. He knew that whenever I
No.
was fighting, it was because I was protecting somebody else. He knew that, and so we got along well. I didn't find any offense that he threw me out of school. I knew the rules if you fight. Well, now here's the thing though. Um, every year, the Princeton Police Department, Borough Police, would hire a cadet from the junior class of the high school. So I'm in the principal's office getting thrown out of school again. And he takes a phone call. And I can tell from the phone call that it's the chief of police. Remember, it's only a 32 officer department. So he's talking to the chief of police. I can tell they're going to choose the next cadet. And so I'm listening, I'm going, and I'm pointing at myself, right? And the principal got a funny look on his face. He got a smile and he said, "Chief, I think I have the perfect cadet for you." And that's
Mm.
how I got hired as a cadet for the Princeton Police Department, which was basically a gopher, right? I would make the coffee, I would deliver it to the guys, I would work the desk with the dispatcher to help out. I would do all the grunt work, if you will, in order to get um, assimilated, if you will, into the police culture and understand, what I was going to be looking at for my future. So um, I did that for my entire junior year. And then because of my number of fights that I was in, basically I was told, you either take an extra course load and graduate early, or you're going to get thrown out of school. So the next year, my senior year, I took a double course load and
Wow.
graduated early. Now, it turned out that changed the course of my life, because I had now turned 18. They just changed the age of majority from 21 to 18. And I just graduated high school when the borough police announced the police test. Now, the police department, like I said, small department, 32 cops, they usually hired a guy every 5 years or so. So it was very infrequent that they would actually give a police test. Now, I'm out. I'm no longer a cadet from the school, right? But they kept me on as a special officer, which just meant that they used me for certain things like parades or whatever. So one day there's a hurricane that comes through New Jersey. And I know that they're going to be overwhelmed at the police department. So I go in to help. And there was a desk officer that I worked with all the time named Johnny, this crusty old Navy vet with literally the heart of gold,
Yeah.
Ah, hey, Sutton, what are you doing here? That kind of thing, right? And and he's scheduled for the 3 to 11 shift. I come in during the day shift because they're just overwhelmed. It's a hurricane. It's crazy. So I'm helping out on the desk, and 3 o'clock rolls around, and Johnny doesn't show up. And we're figuring, okay, we're gonna have to hold over the desk officer. I'll continue to work. He probably couldn't get in because trees were down, etc. Well, I had to go use the bathroom, so I run down to the locker room, and I open the door, and Johnny is laying on the floor. He'd made it into work and had a heart attack.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so I yelled for help and gave him CPR, but he was gone.
Oh wow.
And so we're just stunned, We're just stunned. There is Johnny laying on the floor, he's dead. And we're all gathered around him. And one of the sergeants leans down to me and he looks at me in the eye and he says, "Hell of a way to become a cop,"
Hmm.
because I took his spot, because
Wow.
I was number 2 on the list.
Wow. So you came right in on a critical incident.
I did. And so I became the youngest cop in the state of New Jersey. I was 19. Um, and went through the New Jersey State Police Academy, which is a very tough academy. You live there. It's like
Oh,
military basic
wow.
training.
How long is it?
And it's at that time it was 3 months. So you as an 18-year-old, you could vote, you could drink, you could become a cop, but you couldn't buy ammunition. You had to be 21. So I had to have my mom go buy my bullets for me
Oh
when I
my
went into the
gosh.
police academy.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. That's
She never let
so
me forget
young.
that. Never let
Yeah,
me forget that.
I don't blame her.
I
I
don't
would get a
either.
kick out of that. Um, that's so young. How did your parents feel about you becoming a cop? Well, how did your parents feel about you deciding that you wanted to be a cop, but then doing it so young?
Well, my father was all for it. My father was very proud fact that I was doing what I wanted to do. He
Mhm.
was total encouragement. My mother was very fearful of me taking that job.
Yeah.
She was protective, and she wanted me to go into a nicer profession.
Hmm. Maybe a
And
safer profession.
a safer profession, exactly. And but 100% support throughout my entire career. Um, Later on in my life, after I joined Las Vegas Metro PD. I brought my mother out to live with me after my dad died. So I got to live the last 5 years of her life with me, and that was time. It was most precious time ever.
That's so nice. I love that. What a nice bond. And again, so young. The you're the second youngest cop that I think I've met. The other one is my uncle who became a cop in like the 60s at 18. Much different time, much different standards. But looking back now, you've had an entire career, you're retired, you've seen all the things. Looking back now, understanding what it is to be a 19-year-old kid for all intents and purposes, other than you're legally an adult. What is that like for you to look back and be like, wow, I was doing X, Y, and Z, A, B, and C at 19?
It's funny you ask that question because this is something I look back upon and have conversations with some of my contemporaries, where I look back on some of the decisions I made at 19 years of age, and I shake my head now, going, "Oh my God, you didn't do that." Yeah, yeah, I guess I did. So it's funny. Everyone in the police field and every other field as well evolves through time, right? I wasn't the same cop at 19 that I was when I had 20 years on the job. The core is the same, but you learn life's experiences. And I didn't have any life's experiences at 19. I'm handling domestics with people that are married, and I'm giving them the counseling. I'm about as qualified to do that as Jimmy the Frog over here. But but I muddled through somehow. But so everything was black and white to me, though, right? And now remember, I grew up in this town. This is a small town, and I had to justify in my own mind, okay, what kind of cop are you going to be? Are you gonna be the kind of cop who gives a break to everybody that you know? Because if you do, nobody's going to jail and nobody's getting any tickets because I know everybody.
Hmm.
And I said to myself, I can't do that. I have to be the hard ass. So everybody went to jail and everybody got tickets. I'm writing my parents' friends' tickets. I'm putting people I was in high school and I'm arresting them for a marijuana cigarette. I mean, I literally led the department I made more arrests than the rest of the department combined.
Oh my gosh. At
And
19.
19. And like I said, everything was black and white. Well, that caused some problems internally. Every cop there had at least 5 years on me, most of them 10, 12 years. And they didn't like the fact that I'm showing them all up. Here's this 20-year-old cop, just literally, making more arrests than the rest of the department together. And so it caused some resentment that I had to deal with. And at that time, the way we dealt with stuff was a lot different than you deal with it now. Um, I literally wound up in a fist fight with another cop on the side at the edge of town. It was like, all right, meet me here. And we wound up in a fist fight with other cops standing around watching. And I beat his ass. And after that, we were friends, and all the harassment stopped. But that's the way we dealt with things back then. It was very much mano a mano.
Mhm.
Now I'm on the job a couple of years, and I get to work for a sergeant who I had absolutely nothing but respect for. When I was a cadet, he treated me like a human being, not like the coffee boy, right? He was a natural leader. And when I became a cop, he wound up becoming a sergeant. And I wound up being assigned to him like a year or so after I got hired. And I really admired this guy. He was the quintessential cop. Um, he was calm. He was very competent. He was a natural leader. So one morning after graveyard shift, he says, "Hey, let's go to breakfast." So we go to a New Jersey diner and we're having our coffee, and I'm recounting hey, I did this last night and I did that last night, and he's listening and he's nodding, and finally he says, "Randy, I got to tell you something." He says, you are really a good cop. And I was like, I am. And he says, yeah. He says, you are. He says, you work your ass off. You make good quality arrests. You know, search and seizure. He went down the litany of what made me a good cop. And then he says, but let me ask you one question. Do you know the difference between being a good cop and being a great cop?
Mm.
It wasn't a question I expected.
Yeah.
And I said, no. And he kind of got this weird smile on his face. And he says, it's one word, compassion.
Hmm.
And it was like somebody just flipped a light switch. You know, he didn't beat it into me. He encouraged me, and through his own wisdom and guidance, literally changed the way that I did policing for the rest of my life
In that one moment.
in that one moment. And not only did that happen, but it changed my philosophical views of law enforcement. And that one moment, I call that a legacy moment. Then, as I became a police leader, I created, I encouraged that same legacy, which shows you the power of leadership.
Hmm.
If you take it seriously, and so it was, to me, he's still one of my closest friends to this very day. He wound up becoming the chief of police,
Hmm.
and 10 years later, when I decided to leave this little dinky police department, this 32 officer department, I was a detective. I was at the top of my pay scale. I had a great job, and I made the decision to leave because I was bored.
Mm.
And it was a really tough decision because I'm halfway to retirement, and I like the job that I'm doing. I'm not being challenged, right? So he's now the captain of the police department, and we knew he was going to be the next chief. So I told him of my decision to leave, and he says, "Randy, don't leave." He says, "I guarantee you." He says, "I'm going to be the next chief of police, but after I'm done, you're going to be the next chief of police."
Mhm.
And it was really a tough decision, but it's one that I never look back upon. You know, I had to leave. I left my family. I left everything that I knew to join a police department because I was in search of challenges and more action.
Wow.
And be careful what you wish for, Toto,
Because you got just that.
because you might just get it.
Wow. Okay. So a few things. Well, first, I want to go back a little bit. You had mentioned that you had a Beaver Cleaver upbringing, which is so funny because that's exactly how I describe my upbringing. Like, I think if you go on my website right now, it literally says that in my bio that I had a Beaver Cleaver upbringing. I've described it like that since I was a child. Um, and now you're saying this leader imparted the wisdom on you that is compassion in policing. And that's something, I talk about my dad a lot, obviously. He was a police officer, retired Philly Special Victims Unit. And one thing I have not talked about is that one of his biggest principles and values when it came to how he policed was, well, two of them was compassion and fairness. And he spoke about them all the time, even at home, to the people who worked for him, all of the things. So it's kind of cool to hear you kind of mirror those same values and the fact that you also had a leader who instilled them on you, I think is
Yeah,
really cool to hear.
yeah, and that's, you know what, the the legacy of being a cop, it is such an important quality, one that's not talked about enough. And that's the lives that you touch, both internally and externally. And
Hmm.
that's one of the things that I found so um, enticing about policing is, and one that I found gratifying is
Yeah.
that, you know, if you're consciously aware that everybody you come in contact with, you're leaving some of yourself behind. And so
Yeah.
that dictates. In fact, later on in my career, I wrote an article called "Policing with Honor," and it was published widely in the law enforcement community. And it was about surviving your career ethically, and it touched a chord and at that time I was the director of training at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I was the sergeant in charge of advanced training. And I wrote this article and I started getting phone calls from police agencies. Hey, we read this. Do you do a presentation on that? So I wound up putting an 8 hour presentation together and wound up teaching thousands of police officers across the United States policing with honor. And I instilled these type of values in that training, and I called it legacy based policing. And it was, and I love doing that. That was one of the favorite things I did was being a police trainer. I'm still a police trainer to this day. I
Yeah.
give I give trainees all over the country.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that. And I think it's cool to hear you talk about legacy. It's something that I talk about a lot because it's, in my opinion, and just from my perspective as the daughter of a police officer and the niece and the cousin, it's legacy is such a well, for one thing, it's very important, and it's so much more than just the run in and gun in, and that's part of the legacy, but I think it goes so beyond that. And to your point, it goes to everybody that you touch, whether it's someone who works for you, a victim that you speak to, your own family back at home. It's just a bigger a bigger thing that I want people to understand. You can have a legacy that goes far beyond your career and your job and your retirement, and it can go on for, generations even. So I love to hear you talk about legacy, but also values, because I think this is a really important topic that doesn't get talked about enough.
I
Um,
agree.
so polar opposite of you, my dad became a cop when he was 31.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and he became a cop because he needed a job effectively. Like he was laid off and he started tending bar, and then he was like, I need a big boy job now. So his brother was a cop, so he became a cop. And I often think that that worked in his favor because life experience, maturity,
Hmm.
all of these things. But obviously, not everyone can be a cop at 31. Like we need the young people in the force. So I have spent a lot of time kind of reverse engineering what it means to become, what it meant for him to become a cop at 31, like what comes with that. One of those things is values. He had very established personal values, family values, professional values, just ways that he wanted to impact the world and his own life. And I think that that really did serve him. And it's something that I'm actually working on a training about this because I think it's so important because we're not really taught. I mean, as kids, as adults, like in general, I don't think values are something that's really taught enough. And it's something that I think could really serve police officers as a whole. Because if you have solid values, then I think that you can really handle anything that comes your way.
Well, and if you expand that thought out, um, if we had people with strong values, we wouldn't be seeing the insanity that we're seeing today in the public. You know, if you have values, you're not out running the streets, breaking into stores. You're not out,
Yep.
joining a gang. You're not out doing, keying Teslas. You're
Yeah.
if you have values. But where do those values come from? There's in the best of circumstances, it's learned in the home.
Hmm.
But we all know that many of these homes are not providing that. So then the next place is you learn them in the schools. Well, the schools are an absolute mess, and
Hmm.
they're not teaching anything, let alone values. So what happens is you have rudderless children that are basically thrown to the streets to learn values, and they're not learning them, or what they are learning is not values that are compatible with a successful life.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Okay, you said something that I definitely want to touch on. You were at Princeton for 10 years, you said,
Yes.
and you wanted more action. So you go to Las Vegas. I want to know how you decided on Las Vegas. And then I want to talk about, you mentioned that you left your family.
Hmm. Yeah. So now at that time there was no internet. Okay, so you had to, if you wanted to move to a different police agency, there were magazines and periodicals, and if they were recruiting, you could look and see who was looking to hire cops, what the salaries were. Same stuff you see on the internet now, but it's in paper form.
Hmm.
So I looked and I saw that there was a Southern Florida police agency, a large one, that was recruiting. So and they tailored their test for out of towners. So I thought, okay, you know what? This is about the time Miami Vice, was going on.
Hmm.
And I said, oh, this looks interesting. So I went down and and I tested for the department. And they had the test so that you began it on, got there on a Saturday, and they were going to choose to hire on the next Friday, right? So they did all the entire testing process in a very short period of time. So they knew they were going to hire me. I tested high enough that unless something came up in my background, they were going to offer me a job. And they said, would you like to do a couple of ride alongs? See how you like it. And I jumped at that chance. I said, hell yeah. So they teamed me with a guy who had been a cop in New Jersey and was now in this city. I'm not talking about the city's name for a reason that will become obvious. And they thought that we were going to do like the New Jersey mind meld. We were going to we're going to take out our gold chains. Hey, how you
Oh
doing?
man.
Right. So so I've got this guy and it's graveyard shift. So we're not out on the street 15 minutes. We get involved in a pursuit with a motorcycle. I mean, it's a good one, right? We're the secondary unit, and we're chasing this guy at 110 miles an hour, and I'm going, oh hell yeah, this is exactly what I'm looking for, right here. We're chasing this guy all over Hell and Creation, and we get into an industrial area, and this guy thinks he's going to give us the slip. Well, his skill level wasn't what he thought it was, and he lost control of the motorcycle, and he impacted the side of a warehouse at about 90 miles an hour.
Oh.
And I mean, he was literally a red spot on the wall. He disintegrated. His bike disintegrated, and it looked like somebody threw bushels of $100 bills up into the air because he was packed with dough, packed with money. He was a drug runner. And when he impacted, I mean, it literally looked like somebody threw bushels of money up into the air. And I'm going, oh, hell yeah. I get to see how the big boys work. And we're not on that scene for a minute and a half when the guy I'm riding with says, okay, come on, let's go. And I went, what do you mean, let's go? He says, yeah, the primary unit can handle. Come on, let's go. And I said, well, aren't detectives coming out? I mean, this guy's dead, and we were involved in this pursuit. I mean, I'm a detective. I know that the investigative process. He's, don't worry about it. Come on, let's go. Let's go. He couldn't wait to get me away from that scene. Well, of course, I'm thinking, I think I know why they want me away from this scene. Because probably all that money that is laying on the ground isn't getting impounded. And so that was my first indication that this agency, I call it the ethical environment, that the ethical environment of this agency was not going to be conducive to my own values. And what I saw over the next couple of days just reinforced that this wasn't going to be a place I was going to attach myself to. So I turned down the job when they offered it to me. So I went back to Princeton, back to my little cocoon,
Mhm.
and we're at a Delaware Valley's Detectives Association meeting. Back then, there's all these little departments in a small area, and so the bad guys are going from town to town. We don't even know it because different records, different detectives. So we would share information by going to a countywide detectives meeting. And I was telling everybody the story about that. They knew I was looking for a job. So after telling that story, afterwards, these two FBI agents came up to me and they said, hey, man, if you're looking for a really good department, Las Vegas Metro PD is one of the top. and they're hiring. So it's not often you get a great recommendation like that. So I did my research. I came out to Las Vegas. They had the same kind of testing process where within a week they knew that whether they were going to hire me or not. And did my research and said, this is the agency I want to work for. And wound up never looking back all these years
Wow.
later.
Why not Philly? I mean, you could have just like come over the river and been in a big police department right there, right
I
here.
I I wanted I looked at New York, I looked at Philly, and I
Oh,
just
you're
thought, you know what, this is more of the same. It's just more of it. And
mm,
Vegas had a certain uh, panache to it. This was the Wild West, and
fair.
and I could tell that this was going to be much more conducive to my style of policing. And I'll tell you, it was.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so you get the job and you decide to leave Princeton. Did your family just not want to up and relocate, or was it like kids in school situation? How did you come to move without
No,
them?
I was 30 years old now. So I'm an adult. My parents are, that was towards the end of my father's career.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually wound up buying a house out in Vegas
Oh,
and
wow.
wintering out there.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
that happened a couple of years after I moved out to Vegas. So, and we were very close, very, very
Hmm.
close. So I would come back, but it was different because I would spend much more time with them, when I was a Princeton cop, of course.
Right.
And I didn't know anybody in Vegas. So it was really lonely. And I had to go through the academy again. And it was very stressful because if I didn't make it through this academy, I had no place to go. The chief wasn't going to be bringing me back to Vegas or back to Princeton. I burned
Mm.
that bridge in a big way. That's a
Oops.
that's a funny story. I might tell you after this interview.
I'll make a note.
So if I didn't make it out in Vegas, I was screwed. So I was so motivated. I wound up being the valedictorian of the class. I was the class speaker, and but it was a major challenge to go through academy at 30 and begin my police career all over again as a rookie cop. And
Yeah.
you better swallow your pride and understand that you got to start all over, and you can't let your ego get involved in that.
Yeah. But also, I wonder, do you think that that was like a good sort of ego check for you as you
Oh,
embarked on
big
this
time.
new journey?
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. I mean, here I am. I'm starting all over again. I'm
Yeah.
even though I'm a 10-year cop. I've been through
Yeah.
some stuff. But it was completely different policing style.
Hmm.
And I'll give you an example. So I get out of the academy. I go through my field training period, and my field training officers are guys with less experience as a cop than I, but they had experience as Vegas cops,
Right.
and it was completely different from my little Princeton cocoon,
Yeah.
and it became apparent why within a very short period of time when I was involved in a foot pursuit with a gangbanger who had crashed a stolen car after a pursuit I was in, 2 o'clock in the morning, chasing this guy around the corner. And as I go around the corner of a house, he's waiting for me to ambush me. And I come face to face, looking down the barrel of a 9 millimeter. And luckily, I had my weapon in my hand when I came around the corner, and I fired before he could. And the bullet zinged right by his ear and hit the building behind him, and a piece of stucco hit him in the head. And he thought he was shot. And so he surrendered. And turned out he was 14 years old.
Oh my God.
And it was like, this is the moment where you realize um, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. You're in the real city here, where a 14-year-old is willing to kill you.
So there
And
wasn't any of that in Princeton.
no, no. No, in
Wow.
fact, there was such I was so complacent as a cop in Princeton that I almost did get killed. I walked right in. So Princeton had a very um, kind of like a little urban area where all the shops were, and we had a foot patrol beat. And I knew everybody on the beat because I've been there for my whole life. And this jewelry store right in the center of the block, this lady owned it. I went to school with her daughter, and she was a little scatterbrained, and the alarm was always going off. So one day, the alarm goes off. It's literally half a block away from me. So I just nonchalantly walk right into the door, and I feel the barrel of a gun at the back of my neck. And I see right in front of me this guy wrapping duct tape around her head. I literally walked into an armed robbery in progress. And because I was so complacent, they had me. They had me. And as soon as I walked in and I saw this guy tying her up, I drew my gun, and that's when I felt the other gun in the back of my neck. And this guy told me, "Put the gun down, or I'm going to blow your brains out." And I said, "Well, you know what?" I said, "You may get that shot off, but I'm killing him." And it turned out that the guy who was tying her up was the boss. And only because he realized that he was going to die too, he told his partner to put the gun down. And talk about a reality check. That could have been the end of it
Wow.
for me. And
Yeah. Well,
that's when I realized that complacency kills. And I changed the way. And then you see, and here's the thing: in my little shitty town of Princeton, if I had handled it any other way, like if I had done what we do in the big city, where we don't go into a robbery alarm, we call them and they say, "Step out with your hands up."
right.
They weren't going to do that in Princeton, right? There weren't going to be any of those protocols. So Vegas was an entirely different, world, but it can happen anywhere. A police officer is in danger anywhere in this country. And we have, and one of the problems is complacency with small town cops. They never expect that it's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
And it just, in a city, everything is thrown at you faster and faster. Policing is still policing, but you're challenged more because it's coming at you faster. Every cop is exposed to violence. Every cop is exposed to death. Every cop is exposed to the inhumanity that man, chooses to impart on one another. It's just a matter of frequency and a matter of degree.
Yeah.
And so it was to be a cop in Vegas was an entirely different world than being a cop in New Jersey.
But you did see some shit in New Jersey, clearly.
Oh yeah, yeah. Of course, I did a lot of investigations. There were robberies. I mean, there was action, but not as much as I wanted.
Yeah. You were ready to level up.
I was.
And how long was the academy in Vegas when you went over there?
Um, almost 5 months.
Okay. But it wasn't live
It
in, like,
wasn't residential. It wasn't
okay.
residential, and I would have preferred it to be residential
Really?
because you know what, you still got your whole life that you got to do. You got to have an apartment. You got to do all the things that go along with your life. And when was in a residential academy, it was nothing but study,
Hmm.
right? You were doing PT, you were doing classes, you were doing studying, you were bonding with the guys that you're going to be working with. So I actually preferred the residential academy, because it had its own challenges, but for me, I would have preferred that.
But you're immersed in
Yes,
what your goal is, what you're aiming for, what you're learning. You're
right,
completely immersed and you don't have to sort of like I don't know, navigate the outside world while you're also trying to learn
right.
all of these things and be the
But for
best.
those people that had families, it was much better on them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I imagine. it helps too because when they are a cop, they got to know how to handle regular life and then also policing life. You have
Yeah.
to know how to balance it. So that yeah, that makes sense. When What was like the most jarring difference between, well, do you know how big Vegas is compared to how big Princeton is, the cities? Just for
Yeah. All
context.
right. Let me put it this way. All right. Princeton Borough PD, which is the agency I work for, was 1.5 miles square, and we had 32 police officers. The Las
And it's a
Vegas
really
Metro,
cute town.
it's a very cute town.
Mhm.
It's very, very, very Princetonish.
Yes.
And Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is a combined city county agency, which is very unusual back in those days. The Clark County Sheriff's Department and the City of Las Vegas Police Department combined in 1972 to form the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police. So we were police officers, but we were also sheriff's deputies.
Mm.
And Clark County, which is the county that we are in, is 5,000 square miles. So I went from 1.5 miles square to policing an area of 5,000 square miles. It's bigger than the entire state of New Jersey, one county.
Oh my gosh. And do you know how many cops there are?
Yeah, in my department, we're the ninth largest department in the country.
The ninth.
There's
Okay.
about
You're-
3,000, 3,400.
Yeah. Wow. That's a big difference. So as you made that transition, what do you think was like the most just jarring difference for you?
Well, there was an entire different philosophical approach to policing. I'll give you an example. So my first day in field training here, I'm assigned to the hood, and my FTO, my field training officer, has about 6, 7 years on the job, and we're on patrol, and I'm at it's literally my first day, and you're just supposed to watch. You're not supposed to do anything. You're supposed to watch your field training officer and learn for the first couple of weeks. Don't get, you're complete at his direction. So we stopped 3 gangbangers, and that time the protocol was you put them on the hood of your car, put your hands on the car, and you pat them down, make sure they got no weapons, because everybody's armed in this city. So this ain't Princeton, right? so he puts these 3 gangbangers, they're about 19, 20 years old, on the hood of the car, and he's going to do what's called a field interview to ascertain who they are, because we kept a database of all gang members by doing field interview cards. So he's getting IDs from these guys, and one of the guys there's 3 of them on the hood of the car. One of the guys spits on the ground near this guy's foot, and I don't pay it any mind. Well, then he did it again, and the minute he did it again, my FTO slapped the shit out of him. He one whack slapped him right upside the head. I went, and the guy who got slapped just shook it off and didn't say a word. And they continued on like nothing just happened. And I was like, what just took place here? And we get done, doesn't arrest him, finishes the field interview cards, lets him go. And we get back in the car, and I'm thinking, is this a test? Are they checking me to see if I'm going to report this guy? And so we got back in the car, and I said, I'm a little uncomfortable with what just took place there. I'm being very politically correct, right? And he started laughing. He says, because I slapped the shit out of him? I said, yeah. He says, he was showing me disrespect. He says, first time I gave him that one. The second time he was making his disrespect known. He says, so if I didn't take action, you and I were going to be in a fight with these 3 guys in about 2 minutes. And I went, wow, I am in a different reality here.
Yeah.
And it was urban policing in every shape and form.
Wow. And
So
was that hard to adapt to?
it well it was more consistent. I understood it
Hmm.
because it was on a very this is a an urban area that is it's dog eat dog,
Yeah.
and you realize that these are the real streets here,
Hmm.
and of course that was just that was the first day. So when I came to see over the during my entire field training was really I had to become much more assertive than I was because I was used to the Princeton way where if you hit somebody, if I slapped a guy like that on the grounds of what I just stated to you, I would have been fired
Yeah.
and maybe arrested.
Ooh.
In Vegas, if I didn't do that, I wasn't going to get through field training.
Hmm.
Now that's a so, but it's a valuable lesson. But now you couldn't do that now here, right? That would not fly here at this point because now we have an entirely different kind of policing. But as a result, we had much more control back then,
Yeah.
right? You didn't. You Metro had a reputation. They're firm, they're fair, but do not mess with them
Hmm.
because they will kick your ass. Well, we're in a whole different society now. And because there is no longer fear of policing, 79,000 cops were physically assaulted last year.
Jesus.
79,000
That's like more.
were physically assaulted. That's up from 50,000 just 5 years ago. Well, why?
Oh.
Because there's no more fear of consequences. They're not afraid of the criminal justice system because it's broken. They're not
Mhm.
afraid of putting their hands on a police officer. There should be fear. In fact, I wrote an article called Bring Back the Fear. You should be afraid to put your hands on me of what the consequences are going to be because they're going to be immediate.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, our law enforcement community has been so um, cowed into being non-aggressive that we see more cops injured, more cops killed
Mhm.
that could have been prevented because our officers are afraid to use the proper amount of force at the appropriate time. As a doing what I do now, just with the Wounded Blue, and as a law enforcement commentator on lots of media stations, I review many of the videotapes that come after a critical incident. And I've watched police officers die who shouldn't have because they were
Yeah.
afraid to use the proper amount of force, because they were afraid to be prosecuted, because they were afraid of what the administration would do to them. And we've turned our backs on these men and women. And I mean, I'm literally in a situation right now where, as you and I are speaking, I am working with an officer who it was in a perfectly justifiable fatal shooting, killed a suspect who was on top of his partner, beating him, and managed to get the cop's taser out after trying to pull his gun out of his holster. His partner shot and killed him. He was cleared of anything. And then, because black suspect, white cop, the protesters came out, and suddenly the attorney general of the state arrested him for manslaughter. And we're going through this nightmare right now. This officer, who in a perfectly justifiable shooting, is now being brought to trial for his life. And it is this type of atmosphere that cops around the country are dealing with. Because if you're in New Mexico or you're in New Jersey, you're watching what's happening to this officer and many officers around the country who are being prosecuted for political purposes and going, I don't want that to be me. So I am not going to be using my gun even when I should be.
And it's an impossible position for them to be in.
It's a yes, exactly, exactly. Because and that minutes of hesitation, that seconds of hesitation can mean the difference between life and death.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's just terrifying to think about. I mean, in general, as someone who grew up in a law enforcement family and has, the utmost respect for law enforcement in general, that's scary to think that we're in this place. But then just as a general civilian who wants to feel protected by law enforcement and the justice system, it's even scarier because it's like their hands are tied and
Yeah,
what does that mean for the rest of society, the communities that they're supposed to be protecting?
you're 100% right. And that's actually why I wrote this book, Rescuing
Rescuing
911, the fight for
911.
America. That is exactly why I wrote this book, because this this book is it's the fight for America's safety. Because
Hmm.
I have watched the decline of law enforcement. I have watched what the ramifications are, the deaths of people who shouldn't die, the victimization that has been absolutely rampant throughout this country because of how politics has affected law enforcement and destroyed the lives of so many law enforcement officers. I wrote this book to bring this to the attention of the American people and to ask that we all unite to support the men and women who are out there on the line, who are doing the job every single day, and to give them the support that they need to put people into office who will follow the mission and not follow politics. Now we're beginning to see something with to get away from politics, but you can't help it because what we saw under the Biden administration and the Obama administration was the destruction of the American law enforcement community as we know it. With Trump, I believe we're going to be seeing a rebuilding of that. But this is you can't turn the switch on and make it all go away. We are now in a crisis of law enforcement. We don't have enough cops to go around. Those that are working are cowed into, oh my God, if I use the proper amount of force, am I going to go to prison?
Yeah.
So as a result, we see depolicing. We see the people afraid to join the police department because of what has been done to our police community. And we see cops leaving who have years of incredible experience and knowledge and wisdom who leave the minute they can punch out.
Hmm.
And this is the crisis that we're facing. And that's why I wrote this book, is a call to action for the American people to unite for the right reasons, to protect each other, to protect our law enforcement community, and to protect our people.
And it's a shame too because our law enforcement is just in such an impossible situation and their hands are tied and yet they're still the scapegoat for the entire justice system. So, I lived in New York for a long time and so often people would complain about police because these repeat offenders would be back on the street. And your average Joe doesn't actually understand the justice system and they blame the police for everything because they're the face.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, why aren't the police doing their job? Well, one, they can't because of everything that you just said. But two, when they do their job, the justice system is letting them back out. So it's a lose-lose situation, and the
Right.
police are always taking the fall for it.
Exactly. We call it the criminal injustice system because that's what it's
Fair.
become. That's what it's become. And yeah, this is what law enforcement. This is the the most critical time in law enforcement's history, and we are the government, state government, local government, and the federal government has let the American people down because of the leadership at the political levels who have literally done everything they could to destroy the criminal justice system from within.
Yeah. And This is a soapbox that I could get on that I'm not going to get on, but as someone who I like true crime podcasts, I've always liked watching, the Datelines of the world, but those, especially the podcasts, as they get more and more popular, they're making it worse because they're they're the armchair experts, but like to the umpteenth degree. And they're constantly, they're telling these stories after the case has been solved or the case is closed or the dust has settled, and they're constantly just critiquing all the police work. And they think because they have this podcast or because they listen to this podcast that they know what policing is and what goes into it. And they know, all of the intricacies, and they really don't at all. They don't even know the surface.
Well, and this is the double-edged sword of podcasting. There's those that are doing it right, and just like everything else, there's those, as you say, the armchair quarterbacks who
Hmm.
are, go out on social media and criticize, 15 seconds of videotape.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I see this every single day. I comment on national media every week at least about a police use of force that is completely misunderstood.
Yeah. I want to talk about your retirement before we talk more about your books. I would ask, how did you come to decide it was time to retire? But if I'm not mistaken, you didn't necessarily make the decision yourself. Can you share about that?
Yes, it was. So I did not intend to retire when I did. Now I had 10 years on in New Jersey and 24, almost 24 with Las Vegas Metro PD. I was a lieutenant, and I never tested for anything higher than lieutenant because everything above that is an administrative position, and the lieutenant's rank is the last rank you can actually get into a black and white and go out and do some policing.
My dad
So
says it's the best rank.
it's no, I have to disagree. The sergeant's the best rank.
Oh, really?
I was a sergeant for 14 years,
Hmm.
um, and but lieutenant is way up there. It's the best. It's the best rank in certain ways because you can still be a cop, but you don't have to push a black and white and answer every call, right?
Right,
So
right.
you can be discriminating about what you respond to. Um, but I loved it. I loved being a cop. I loved being a lieutenant, and I stayed my entire lieutenant's career on graveyard shift because in Vegas that's where the fun is.
Right.
So on this particular evening, the evening that changed my life, um, I was on patrol 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had a young cop with me because I was the watch commander. Watch commander means you're the highest ranking officer on duty.
Mm.
And whenever I was watch commander, I would take a cop with me so I could get to meet my people because had hundreds of people working for me.
Mhm.
So this young man is with me, and we're driving down Las Vegas Boulevard, right in front of Bally's Hotel, and I talked to him like I'm talking to you, and suddenly I found myself talking slower, and
Mm.
I was unable to control it, and I literally felt my brain slowing down,
Mm.
and I realized that I'm having a stroke, and I stopped the police car right there, and I said, "Get me medical. I'm having a stroke." And this kid's looking at me like, "Is this the way the lieutenant messes with people?" And I got out of the car to go around to the passenger side in case he needed to get me to the hospital, and started speaking gibberish. And I knew I was speaking gibberish, but I couldn't control it. And what I was trying to say wasn't coming
So
out.
scary.
It was the most frightening moment of my life. And
Mhm.
then I lost the ability to speak and move altogether and crumpled to the pavement, laying there helpless. And tourists are walking by me taking my picture.
What?
Yeah, laying there, unable to speak, move. And I heard the sirens coming. I'll tell you, when you're in a position like that, hearing the cavalry coming, that's an amazing feeling.
Mhm.
But I wasn't afraid of dying. I guess that's one of the most important points. I was afraid of living like that. I was praying
Mhm.
to die, and they got me to the hospital, and um, once again, that angel that's been on my shoulder my entire career was with me again. And the clot went through my brain, did some damage, but I survived it. But it ended my police career. And 3 weeks before that, my mother died in my arms.
Oh, wow.
And then 2 months before that, I was in another fatal shooting. So there was a lot going on, and
Yeah.
all that pressure and all that stress added to what I came to find out I had a serious heart condition I didn't know about,
Mm.
and ended my career. And then what happened next was probably the most devastating part, and that's my own department just turned its back on me and said, "We're not paying your medical bills. We're not giving you your benefits."
How can they do that?
I said, that's what I had. I said, "What are you talking about? You can't do that. It's the law." "Yeah, well, make us." And I mean, it was the most devastating. It was the most devastating thing that ever happened to me, other than the loss of my mom, was my own agency literally abandoned me and just threw me away. And I had to get a lawyer. I had to fight him. And here's the worst part. I actually went in to go see the sheriff who I worked with for 24 years. And I said, "How do you treat me like this? I almost gave my life for this department on more than one occasion."
Yeah.
And he looked at me and says, "Randy, this isn't personal, man. It's just business." And I came to find out he was telling me the truth. See, I was no longer an asset. I was now a liability. And here's one of the fallacies that we think we're all part of the blue family, right?
Mm.
That's what we're taught from the time we go through the academy.
Hmm.
We're all part of the same team. Well, then you get sick and you get abandoned and literally thrown away. So I had to get a lawyer. I had to fight him. I won every single hearing, and yet they continue to pay tens of thousands of dollars of taxpayers' money to fight me. And I'm going, why?
Couldn't
Well,
it?
it became apparent why. They knew I was going to win, but they knew that it would take well over a year, and they were hoping I would die in the meantime. That's a harsh reality to face. They would rather me die than just pay me my medical bills and give me my disability benefits, which
Which
are
you worked for?
pennies anyway.
Yeah, they probably spent more
Oh,
in
they
legal
did.
fees.
Well, not well, considering the years that I have lived, that they didn't expect me to.
True.
But that's all I was to them. I was an actuarial equation,
Wow.
and so it was devastating. I mean, I was a huge believer in the blue family.
Yeah.
These are my brothers and sisters. How can they treat me like this?
Mhm.
And it was really disillusioning. I went through some very dark times as a result of that. And then, because I was the most featured officer on the TV show Cops, because I was in the movies like Casino, because I'd written books, because I was a police trainer, I was very visible in the law enforcement community. Facebook was becoming a big deal. And suddenly cops start reaching out to me. "Randy, I know you don't know me, but I was shot in the line of duty and my department has thrown me away. Randy, I know you don't know me, but I was paralyzed in a car accident in my patrol car. The department has abandoned me." One after another. And I went, "Oh my God, this isn't just me. This is happening to cops across America." And everyone ended, "I feel forgotten, I feel abandoned, and I feel alone." So I put together a little group of us that we could, provide peer support for one another. And I realized how effective that was. And also realized there was no national resource for these men and women. If you die in the line of duty, there's all kinds of resources for your family.
Yep.
There's money, there's all kinds of stuff. Tunnels of Towers will build your family a house. They'll pay your mortgage. You get severely injured in the line of duty or disabled, and there was nothing. So
Mhm.
I created it. and we are the Wounded Blue, and we are the National Assistance and Support Organization for Injured and Disabled Officers, and we've helped more than 15,000 cops in the last 5 years. So,
Wow.
but here's the thing. If all these things hadn't happened to me, things that I thought were the worst that could ever happen, the stroke that ended my career, the abandonment by my own department, if that had not happened, I would never have created an organization that's literally saved the lives of police officers around this nation. So, hence my life's philosophy, and that is you cannot choose your destiny, but you can create your legacy. And that legacy, for me, is the Wounded Blue.
Absolutely. And it's so just heartbreaking to hear, what you went through and what so many other cops have gone through. And, it really emphasizes the point that sometimes you hear that the department won't be there for you when you need them, and you give so much to the department, and then when you need something, they're not necessarily going to be there. But I think it's especially heartbreaking to hear the stories from the people like yourself who really gave so much for the Blue family, for that law enforcement, you know, career and calling and all of that, because it's so common when you're a police officer, it becomes so important to you and so ingrained in your lifestyle and who you are. And then to know or to hear that they can, drop you like a hot potato if you get injured is just like, I mean, it's horrifying because
Well,
people
and
will put so
that's
much
why,
aside
and
for the
that's
job.
why there are so many. We hear about police suicide. Police suicide is a major problem.
Yes.
What's not tracked is the officers who kill themselves after they become injured.
Mm,
We don't even have an idea how many officers that is because there's
mhm.
no tracking of them at all. But that devastating abandonment is, um, that's why what we do is so important.
Yeah. Absolutely is. I love everything that you're doing with the Wounded Blue. Share about your books. You've got A Cop's Life, The True Blue. Now you have Rescuing 911. You've got a podcast. Share about all of these things. What made you decide to do the books, write the books, start the podcast? I'd love to hear about it.
Well, I never intended to do any of those things. I,
I can
I
relate.
never, I never planned to be a writer. I never planned to be an actor. I never planned to do podcasts. Um, but I was led to those things. I had a life-changing experience in midway into my career in 1998. I saved the life of a 1-month-old baby who'd been shot in the face in a drive-by shooting, and it was such an incredibly emotional moment for me that night I went home and I wrote the story about it called Her Name Was Jackie. And I didn't intend to be a writer. I just felt like I needed to get it out of my
Yeah.
brain and my heart. And so I wrote the story on a yellow pad, stuck in a drawer, and it sat there for 3 years until the World Trade Center was attacked. And then that was the most devastating day in law enforcement history for the number of cops killed. And I felt helpless. I wanted to help those families. And suddenly I thought about that story that was sitting in that drawer. And I said, you know what? Every cop I know has a story like this. I'm going to ask them to write that story, put it in a book, and then give all the royalties to those families.
Mm,
And that's exactly what I did. And that
wow.
was my first book called True Blue, Police Stories by Those Who Have Lived Them. And that began my writing career because the editor-in-chief at St. Martin's Press liked my story so much. He said, write your own book. And that became my book called A Cop's Life, which is still available today and I believe, is my best book. And I named my podcast after that, A Cop's Life, because in essence, my podcast talks to police officers about their lives, and it's about a cop's life. So that began my writing career, and now literally just days ago, Rescuing 911 came out, and so I urge any of your listeners, go to Amazon, get the book Rescuing 911, share it, review it. I beg you,
Mm-hmm.
review the book because it means everything.
Yes.
And share it with your friends, share it with your family, and enjoy it and join the movement.
And rescuing 911 is almost like a message to civilians. Is that what you
It
were
is,
saying
yes.
to, okay, so that they can
This is
better understand?
Yep. This book is not geared towards police. This is geared towards America, and
Amazing.
trying to get America to understand what has happened to policing, what has happened to our criminal justice system, and also for police officers to realize they're not alone. That
Mhm.
that that many of the officers who are featured in this book have been basically sacrificed on the altar of public opinion and what has happened to our law enforcement world. So
Yeah.
it's written so that everybody can understand it. This isn't a very what's the word I'm looking for? You don't have to be a knowledgeable expert. You don't have to be a
There's no
scholar.
jargon.
This is right. This is geared to America. Read it. It's a quick read. It's very impactful. You'll hear some stories that you'll go, how is this even possible
Yeah.
that these men and women are going through this? But
Hmm.
this book is meant to unite America, and that's my mission.
That's awesome. I love that. I can't wait to read it. You also have the Wounded Blue also has their big summit coming up in the fall. Can you share
Yes,
about the summit? And then I've actually always wondered, is that for cops only or is that for cops and families?
cops and families.
Okay.
We really encourage officers to bring their significant other, their spouse, because when a police officer becomes injured, either physically or emotionally, who else is suffering? It's the family.
Mhm.
We have children panels that have been unbelievable of children telling what they felt when they knew that their mom or dad was suffering from PTS. I mean, there's really some amazing stuff that comes out, and it's if now as a police trainer, I can say this without any equivocation: if a police officer or retired cop has any one training to go to, this is it, because this is life changing, life saving, marriage saving. The best speakers in the country um, that will. I mean, I literally have had cops stand up and say, "If it weren't for this conference, I was going to kill myself."
Wow.
That's how important it is. So I'm just asking any police officer that's listening to this, go to our website, thewoundedblue.org, and sign up for this training. It's not expensive. It's $395 for 4 days. And it's in a beautiful hotel here in Vegas, and they're giving an amazing price, less than $100 a night.
Oh, wow.
So it is. I just beg you, if you're a cop, please come to this training. You will not be sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to put all the information for your books, your podcast, and then also the summit in the show notes so that people can find it. I absolutely encourage anyone to go check out all of the things. The summit is incredible. I've heard such amazing things about it.
You should
Um,
think about coming.
I am thinking about coming. I was going to come last year, but I wasn't sure if I would be allowed because
You may
I
you may know somebody.
I might. I might. Well, Sergeant John Mattingly is one of the speakers, right, this
he
year?
is. He is.
Yeah, I
He's
interviewed him for the podcast a couple of months ago.
he's an amazing guy. In fact,
Amazing.
John is a recipient of the Order of the Blue Heart Award,
Oh.
because he was shot in the line of duty,
Hmm.
and his department never even acknowledged his injury.
Nope.
Well, we do that because we know there's officers around this country who've been severely injured in the line of duty, and their department even ever acknowledged them. Well, we
Hmm.
do that. That's part of what we do, and because literally that acknowledgement of being injured can be the difference between life and death.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're doing. I am going to think about coming this year. It's in September. Is there anything that you want to share that we didn't get to?
Well, we covered it. We covered a lot of ground.
I mean, there's a lot. I feel like you've
We
got a
covered a
lot
lot of
more
ground.
stories, you've got a lot
Oh, I
more
do.
wisdom,
I
you've got
do.
all
I
kinds of
do.
stuff to share.
Well, let me say this for those that want to support the Wounded Blue, we
Mhm.
are. I take no salary. I live on my pension. All the money that we and everything comes in is a charitable donation. We're a national 501(c)(3). We can't do it without the support of people that are listening to this podcast, people that care about their cops. So I urge you, give what you can. If you can do $11 a month or 19 or 20 or 1,000, whatever you can do, please do. If you are a business or a national organization that wants to become a sponsor of the Wounded Blue, contact me directly, Randy at thewoundedblue.org, Randy at thewoundedblue.org. Or if you're a cop who's struggling, contact me. You will be helped.
Amazing. Great note to end on. Thank you again for being here. You are amazing. I absolutely love what you're doing, and I really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.